So I'm kind of wanting to speak to what Satbir said is like, the word therapy could mean different things. And Satbir is kind of saying that like identifying strength and identifying supportive resources and surrounding yourself with supportive, strengthening resources is a healthy, quote, therapeutic thing. And that's for sure fucking true.
We now bring you Enter the Freud.
Warning, this is for entertainment purposes only. It is no way medical advice. Listen at your own risk.
What the hell do you guys think trauma is? And I'll say specifically a distinction between trauma and I got in a car accident and broke my leg, physical trauma, versus psychological trauma, right?
Yep.
And so, like, what do you guys want to weigh in? Like, what do we think this is? What do normal people think this is?
It's really important to differentiate between two different things, and a lot of people are not doing that, and it's problematic that they're not doing it. So I want to be super clear about this. Trauma versus difficulties in life. There's this saying you hear from time to time, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger.
Yeah.
So we know that saying, right? That saying is true of difficulties in life. That saying is not true of trauma. So difficulties in life are things where they're stressful, they're difficult, but you learn to adapt to them. And after you've recovered from them, you're kind of stronger now because you're like, you've thickened your skin.
Yeah.
Right? And that's this idea, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Trauma, what differentiates trauma from that is that the difficulty that hits you is too much for you to cope with. You don't have the resources to adapt and cope and get stronger. So this thing happens in your psyche. Actually, it happens physically in your body, somatically, as well as psychologically. So I think physical trauma and psychological trauma, there's a lot of similarities there. But like a splitting off happens. Like the thing is so painful that I have to split off from it because my psyche or my system can't integrate it. So I split off from it, and this thing goes in the closet because it's too fucking gnarly. So I'm just going to put that in the closet because I can't really deal with it. But when you put something in the closet, other parts of your self go with it. So you kind of lose some parts of yourself. And so some people who are really traumatized, you'll see they're almost a little bit like zombie-ish or cut off or flat or robotic, or they can't really deal with life, or they can't deal with relationships. And that's because a lot of whole parts of their psyche have been split off and just quarantined away, because to have those parts of themselves return, they'd have to deal with the fucking trauma.
Yeah. Awesome. Dude, that's a great... That is awesome.
Okay, but then coming back to it, but the problem with a lot of shit, a lot of people out there are talking about, trauma-informed yoga or trauma-informed education. The problem with that is those people aren't differentiating between trauma and difficulties in life, and people are increasingly putting difficulties in life in the category of trauma. And thus, we're trying to bubble wrap the world so that no one has to deal with difficulties in life.
Yeah.
But having people deal with difficulties in life is super fucking important to developing strength and resilience.
Yeah.
Whereas trauma is not helpful. And as our culture has gotten softer and softer, we're putting more and more just normal, actually healthy difficulties in life in the category of trauma. And that's why Americans are so fucking soft and spoiled and lame.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Okay.
So you can see I have some feelings about this.
Yeah, dude. I guess so. Well, so here's my question is because you're making a clear distinction, and if we are going to accept this distinction, then, some things are going to feel like a life struggle to some people, but the same fucking experience would be categorized as traumatic for someone who has just a lower threshold for crazy stuff in their life, right? And let me give you an example, right? Like, if all three of us are in a car accident, and basically this somehow the car crashes, blah blah blah, no one is hurt, we all walk away from it, right? But then afterwards, one of us is really rattled and like has nightmares about it, and then can't drive. They're so afraid they can't drive. Then, like, are we all traumatized, or is only the one person who can't drive and has nightmares? Like, this is what I really struggle to identify, and I think in the story of India, as everyone is now starting to seek therapy very late in the game, and there's going to be a lot of talk about trauma-informed yoga therapy, trauma-informed life afterwards. I just want this to be very clear that, hey, if some people can drive cars and are not having nightmares, what do we say about that? And I know, okay, that's a lot of questions, right? But so, do you have any thoughts about this?
I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I don't want to blab. Satbir, anything you're wanting to say or add?
Well, I was talking to my buddy about this yesterday, and he told me that he read 10 books on this fucking subject, and I was just like, holy shit, like, I don't know where the fuck to begin or what I even consider fucking any form of trauma. I don't know if I fucking unpack any of this shit. I mean, it's something that I can kind of relate to, but I have no fucking idea where the threshold is, like when the difficulty like ends and when trauma begins for my own fucking life. I don't know. I'm more one of those people that just kind of keeps fucking packing it on, you know? And it's like, whatever, you know?
You're like the white David Goggins.
I love that. I love that dude, man.
Okay.
Okay, so the question you asked, porn, is a really good one. So let's just come up with some really obvious things that we can start as we move into the gray area. But no, let's use another more kind of immediate example. Let's say the three of us go out one night and some people come and attack us, and we get in this gnarly fight and someone gets stabbed or whatever. Like, my life experience, that's pretty foreign to my life experience, and I don't think I've built up familiarity or resilience or like tough skin to that. So that's gonna like jar me and fuck me up, and I'm gonna have like weird dreams or something. I'm gonna be fucked up in a certain way. And then and who knows, but let's pretend Satbir, for him, that's going to be like, you know, it's going to suck and whatever, but like he's familiar with it. He's kind of built up resilience, no big deal. And so he kind of copes with it, and it doesn't fuck him up for the rest of the week or the rest of the month. And that might even fuck me. Actually, I had a friend who got jumped in the alley a couple years ago, and it kind of fucked him up kind of permanently, you know? Mm-hmm. But maybe Satbir, it doesn't really fuck him up that much. He's like, yeah, I've dealt with that kind of physical violence a million times, no big deal. And then maybe porn, for some reason, it triggers some childhood memory and it fucks up porn in a different way than it fucks up me, but it fucks porn up, but it doesn't fuck Satbir up. So you can see the three of us all kind of can respond in different ways to the same thing.
Yeah. I'd like that distinction. And then my question is, like, I feel like, are we all allowed to just say that I experience it this way? Or why is there
no.
Why is there
no.
Yeah, why is there pushback if one of us, let's say Satbir, for example, is like, oh, that fight was badass. Dave, you know, you've never been in a fight before, but you handled yourself fucking awesome, bro. And it's just like a call out, like he's calling out UFC moves, right? And so in his mind, this is all hypothetical, but in his mind, he's like, fuck yeah, you did awesome. You guys are, yeah. And then later it goes on to, it just becomes an awesome story of when we survived a tough situation, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, is he allowed to do that? Like,
Well,
tell him to stop.
Yeah, maybe Satbir's allowed to do that, but I think here's the reason this whole question is so fucked up right now in our time. Is everything we're talking about so far is fairly fine and normal, but when we add this next element in, here's where it gets really fucked up. And it's the words like spoiled or entitled are kind of capture what I'm trying to get at. Let me see if I can think of a good example. If the three of us go out to dinner and the food's really bad and the service is really bad, and we three of us go out to dinner and then the waiter comes and the waiter for some reason says something offensive.
Okay.
Right? And I'm like, what? How could you say that? That's traumatic for me. Right?
Yeah.
And you and Satbir are like, yeah, that was kind of fucked up the waiter said that, but whatever. Waiters sometimes are assholes. That dude is an asshole. And I'm like, no, that was offensive. I'm traumatized.
Yeah.
Just because I decide I'm traumatized doesn't mean I'm traumatized. Just because I assert I'm traumatized and I was offended, that doesn't mean I'm actually traumatized. So we all don't have a right to claim traumatized whenever we feel like it. And just because, like I was saying earlier, a thing could traumatize me that doesn't traumatize you, but just because I've decided it traumatizes me doesn't mean that it traumatizes me.
Dude, I can't believe that you're saying that, because I didn't even see what a problem that is, right? Like Satbir, as you're listening to this, how many times have you heard people from India announce that they are traumatized?
I mean, it's clearly starting to happen all the time now. You know what I mean?
What? Yeah, why? What is going on right now?
It's kind of what you're talking about with the mass movement of it's kind of popular to do that and say that. I mean, yeah, like, look, I think there is fucking real trauma, but I mean, it's kind of like it's all coming out that what we kind of bought into was not the reality. You know what I'm saying? Like the yogis fucking this world that he like laid out for us, the web, or you know what I'm saying? Like it was kind of like we did all that shit for no fucking reason is what it comes down to.
What shit? Wait, explain it to Dave. What are we talking about?
Okay, so like I'm sure you've told him about, you know, like we're here to save the fucking world and we're going through all these like harsh environments. We're doing all these things because the world is, you know, going in this way. You know what I'm talking about. Clearly you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, of course.
So when it comes out that the yogis fucking thing was like fucking dumb, you know what I mean? Like it's you know, it was essentially homeboy was just trying to get with women and spend the money and live this like this lifestyle, you know what I mean? So I think that it's like I think there's so many people doing a redirect and trying to make sense of what we went through, you know, and it's like they kind of hit a wall, and that's where I think people get stuck and they're like, this is so fucked up beyond belief, and now I got to make sense of it in some way.
So are you saying that people who previously maybe didn't identify as traumatized are now looking at their life and saying, holy shit, I'm fucked up as a result of this?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah?
I think so.
Like even more than the fact that there's monetary payouts, right? Like, I mean, that's a weird aspect of this particular scenario we're talking about, right? Like, if you were traumatized from India, which, by the way, we can easily identify, everyone there was fucking traumatized, right? The question is, do you then experience that neglect, repeated insult, injury, abuse? Do you experience all of that as trauma today or not? Like, what do you think about that, Mr. Satbir?
I think it's easy to like just pick and choose because there's so much fucking information out there, and it clearly makes it easier when everybody's talking about it with that certain light on
it. Are you saying the light of, like, if you were there, and because if we just run down the criteria, right? And look, can I read you guys the criteria of this thing called complex trauma?
Sure.
Let's see. Okay, so here's something pretty fascinating, right? Dave, and you actually made reference to this, where it's like, how does this complex trauma affect adults in particular? Well, there's like an increased physical response of cortisone, norepinephrine, which can have some kind of long-term effects, including obesity, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, heart disease, and increased risk for cancers. Like, I would not have guessed that, right? Because this is really going to skew the argument that you can be okay after being traumatized, right? This is where we get it. This discussion is going to get really weird in a second, right? Okay, now let's say, what does this do to people's brains? All right? Because this neuroimaging is like it's like the cool way to justify your hypothesis and your theory in psychology right now. So structural changes after, okay, so there's a volume or size change that happens in specific areas of the brain. Two specific ones, right? So the amygdala enlarges, which is just like your alarm system, your pathway or the processing piece that informs you that you're in danger. That gets bigger, and then the parts of the hippocampus shrink. But in essentially saying that you stop remembering accurately what the fuck happened, right? Which this is all too clear in our stories, right? Where Satbir, you were held over the railing by that kid, and then other people were like, no, it was some other kid, right? Like the memories of traumas get really weird, and then so okay, I don't even know if these observations are accurate, right? Because there's a real problem in psychology replicating studies right now. Have you heard about that, Dave?
No.
Dude, it's so bad that like a lot of the stuff that's being that was considered really groundbreaking in neuroscience was a lot of it was fraudulent just to get grants. Like the really big one, the biggest one I think in all medical history was the guy who produced this Alzheimer's research that showed that this drug actually stopped the amyloid plaques and tangles. Dude, yep. and as a result, for 10 years, all other research continued to prove that this was true. And it was all fucking false. The original pictures were actually photoshopped of the brain cells.
Shut up.
I swear to God. It's so it's like it's unthinkable that this is how out of it that but and so I'm not trying to say it's just a side piece, right? I'm not trying to say that this stuff about complex PTSD or complex trauma is not real, right? Because it's fucking real. But then and then what are we going to do when somebody goes through this long life where there's repeated injury, and then somehow they're like happy and shit, and they're not dying from fucking obesity and cancer, and like what is that, right? What are we supposed to do with? I guess this is where my story comes in, and then I'm overly excitable about this. Sorry, what?
Okay, so let's bring this back to the 3HO boarding school thing. So we can see it's kind of like I want to try to like categorize different people into different categories. So here's a quick attempt, and you guys help me out. I bet there's one group of people that just got so fucked up by the experience that it just kind of beat them down, and they're now drug addicts, or they killed themselves, or they have serious mental health stuff, or they're institutionalized. And pretty clearly the traumatic experience there, or the complex trauma, or the chronic neglect and abuse really like fucked them up, and they've kind of like didn't really deal with it, right?
Sure.
Then there's probably another group who are just like pretend that everything's okay. And maybe they're still on board with 3HO, and they try to minimize the thing, and they're like, oh no, it was good, it's all good, right? Are there some that just are kind of like totally in denial that anything was bad?
Satbir, answer that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
Like how much would you say they're in denial? Like, what about the people who still identify as Sikhs, and they say that there was no malicious intent?
Yeah, I guess that's more. It's more like the parents of some of those people have that stance, and it's probably less because like anybody that went there from GNFC, GRD, I don't know that much about the kids that came later, but yeah, everybody's got some serious stories to tell. So they'll go down and we'll bro down and talk about all that stuff. But I don't know if it's like straight denial. It's more like, more like those guys are being bitches or some shit like that. It kind of gets more like framed like that. Not that, like clearly, like if you were there, you saw some shit.
Right.
Like,
Right, but yeah, Dave,
Okay, so hold on, let me keep going. Okay, so then there's a category of people that are like fucking pissed, and they want to be paid a lot of money. They're like, I was traumatized. This boarding school, 3HO, Yogi Bhajan, they fucked me up. Fuck them. Pay me millions of dollars, motherfuckers. There's that category of people, right?
Yeah.
And then it feels to me like the two of you, I kind of have the sense that I group you into a category that you see that it was fucked up, but neither of you are like screaming in outrage and demanding to be paid back. But you also know that you guys maybe have some scars, and there maybe should be some thing to be addressed. And so you kind of are sort of like trying to balance some fairly tricky, it's fucked up, people have a right to be pissed, but if you fully identify with victim and needing money, that's maybe not so good for you either, right? Is that an accurate portrayal of where you guys are?
What do you think, Satbir?
Dude, I honestly don't know where I fall into any of that, man. Like, it's just like we're talking about it, we're telling stories, that's fun. If I want to like go here and be like, oh, like you can kind of go like anywhere you want with it, like kind of what I was saying. I don't know. It's a lot to unpack. It's I've considered going to therapy. I was just like, yo, dude, like I don't want to become like unraveled in the process of like, because if I start and that's what I was actually curious about, Dave, for you, like, having not gone through this and you've heard some of these stories, like, what's your take on that? Because, like, most of the people that I talked to about this were people that were there too. So it's like, I don't have this way of, getting like the feedback. And from what I've heard from other people, from their therapists, they're just like, oh, like one story and you were so fucked. Like that's kind of like what I hear from my friends. And I'm like, oh shit. Like, oh, this is, I have no idea. It's just like, if you just grow up in the environment, that becomes totally normal. You know what I'm saying? I guess I was telling Pooran about this years ago. There was some psychologists that met with us, and same kind of thing. We were just kind of shooting the shit and telling stories, and they were just like, they were blown away. They're like, what the fuck is going on? I'm like, we never knew about this shit. And I'm like, we just assumed that all the people in the community kind of had an idea about what was going on in India, and clearly they didn't, They had no fucking idea. So, I don't know. I have no idea where you go from here, or even like how I feel about the situation. It's like I said, like on one hand it was fucking awesome and fun, and then there's another part of me that does have fucking nightmares about me killing some of these fucking teachers. You know what I mean? Like it's, like I'm like, ha ha ha, but I'm like, oh shit, like I wish I didn't think like that, or I wish my subconscious wasn't like trying to work this shit out 20 years later, 25 years later,
I guess one important factor in this is like how much a person's sense of themselves, or if I use the word ego, how much they identify with being a strong survivor versus how much they identify with being a traumatized victim. And probably the reality is there's truth to both. Everyone has some strength and some ability to survive, and everyone got fucked up and was a victim and is struggling. But maybe it's important to kind of try to balance the two, because it feels like if you just completely identify with the traumatized victim, I feel like it kind of sucks you down a hole that's not very productive. If you totally identify with the strong survivor, I actually think that's probably more functional for you, but it's also unrealistic, because I think those are the people that probably go into the like, oh, it's all good, it's fine, you know, and that just doesn't seem like that's accurate. But increasingly, the trauma-informed culture that we're in, it seems like it's kind of encouraging people to identify more and more with a traumatized victim.
Yeah.
And it feels like that's not a helpful path to take.
So, okay. I had this patient, right? He's like a special forces guy who he like can't go to group therapy because like he'll go to the VA and there's group therapy and everyone's like, yeah, we all served. It's for like combat vets, right? So he goes in there and his challenge in this same thing is just trying to figure out what is everyone talking about when they're there talking about trauma, right? Because it's mostly people that, yeah, they were deployed in other countries, but then they were just doing like some analytics or they worked in the kitchen. And he's like, no one here actually ran around and shot people in the face. And it like, that's a repeated thing for him that he's like, I don't think we're all talking about the same thing. Right. He's like, but that's what's so weird is once you start doing this kind of a hierarchical comparison of like who went into the real shit, and then as a result, you have these crazy ass symptoms. Or what about the people who were right there in the shit and then afterwards they don't really have weird symptoms? Like it's, I guess the more that we all find out about this, the more the story will be complete, and we're not going to be so like confused, because it's like, yeah, that's just, it is a distinction, right? I don't know why I told that story if it's helpful at all.
It makes me think, hold on, my battery on my camera just died. Let me swap it out so that I can have video here.
Mr. Satbir, what did you think about that absurd story? Like, are you afraid if you go to therapy, that's going to be you?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree. I mean, yeah, dude. I just feel like same thing. Like, I've piled on so much shit, and the level that I've been able to deal with is fucking insane. You know what I mean? You know, I was telling my buddy about me almost getting into a fight playing basketball, and he was like, "Oh my god!" Like, and I was like, "Yeah, like it didn't faze me." And the other guy I was playing against was shook. Like, you know, that's how he dealt with it. And I was like, to me, that was just like another thing. It wasn't that big of a deal, and right. It didn't affect my game after that at all. I still, you know, drained fucking 10 shots in his face. You know what I'm saying? Like.
All right, something. All these different stories. A model has formed in my brain. Here's my model. Okay, so imagine a person going forth into the world, and imagine this person has had no trauma. They have 100% of their psyche there and available to them, and then imagine as each little trauma happens, a little piece is chipped off from it because they have to split it, and they stick it in the closet. And this is like genuine trauma that actually you can't deal with. I'm not talking about difficulties.
Yeah.
And so the more you lose, there's maybe a critical mass where after you've lost 50% of your psyche, now you sort of capitulate and you're fucked. And maybe you go psychotic or become a drug addict or whatever. But as long as you're above the 50% threshold, you can keep forging ahead. And some people identify with this, like, the survivor warrior center of this, and they don't identify with those little pieces of them that got traumatized and stuck in the closet. And so they stay identified with life is fucking hard, but I'm going to forge ahead. But as they're doing it, they're losing little parts of themselves into the closet. And at some point, if they decide they want to do some sort of like trauma healing therapy, they can potentially go and reintegrate parts of themselves. But they need to stay identified with this center survivor warrior part of themselves. Because if they start identifying with these little victimized parts of themselves in the closet, they like lose their strength and momentum to like continue to forge ahead in a world that's fucking hard. And I think there's got to be one other variable in my model, which is like how much, kind of Satbir's story he just said, how strong you can be to like hang in there in the battle of life. And you need difficulty and overcoming difficulty and surviving difficulty to like increase your strength, to like stay in this main thing. And so I think that part of the problem, the beef I have with trauma culture right now is they encourage people to go and identify with our wounded little shards of ourself that are in the closet.
Yes.
And I think it's important to not identify with those things. I do think ultimately to reach a higher level of maturity or something, you should acknowledge they're there and you can do work to try to like reintegrate them. But I think you want to stay identified with the survivor warrior and that life is hard, life is not easy, and you got to stay identified with this thing.
Okay, sorry if I'm if you had something to say, Satbir, because listen, Dave, what you're saying is there's something critical. You're pointing out that this person, that this make-believe person you're saying, they have a strong self that is ready to deal with the challenges of the world. But those who identify with the fucked up little trauma pieces, they obviously don't have a fucking strong self to persevere. That's the part that makes this so odd. Like you listen to any podcast, there's tons of podcasts, there's all kinds of people, it's mostly women, but whatever, that's just the field is full of women. I'm serious. And people who have PTSD and stress-related disorders are predominantly women. And for whatever fucking reason. Like that, so there's a lot of talk about, it's, now that I know, because I was trying to figure out for 20 fucking years, but now that I know really what my thing was, it was trauma. It's like the entire identity of a self is being put through the lens of trauma. As if we know that we are traumatized, then we can be strong and go through life. That's my comment about what you're saying is this is just a fucking new language to try to describe, hey guys, let's be strong and then try to face life's difficulties head on. Right? So I see what they're trying to do, but I'm having a terrible reaction to that also. Right? I don't know what my struggle with it is. It's like there was once upon a time when I too felt totally confused and lost and fragmented in life, right? Like, look, okay, one time I was a kid, I got lost at Kennedy Space Center, right? You know where the space shuttle launches off? Right? I was with my parents.
Yep.
And I don't know, I fucking like went to a rocket, they went somewhere else, is massive crowd. Dude, I was lost, have no clue. Like, I was crying, and some people found me, and they were like, oh, they somehow found my parents, and I was, like, reunited with them. And like, I haven't thought about that until this moment, right? Like, what a stupid thing. Like, that should be extremely traumatizing, right? But then shortly after, I fucking went to the Himalayas without my parents forever. And so then, like, looking back on, I was lost at Kennedy Space Center for an hour? Like, what a tiny, silly story, dude. That's so silly. And like, and I think that's just a part of, like, me, the Special Forces guy, Satbir, where we're like, yeah. Like, we've seen some fucking crazy shit, and then I don't know why there's a human tendency to then laugh at or somewhat look down on baby traumas. Oh, your biggest thing was you were lost at the Kennedy Space Center. And so then you're going to try to translate the struggles in your life, the reason why you overeat. This is where my charge comes from, right? If you're going to try to explain your life sucks today because of your episode at the Kennedy Space Center, and then you have a trauma bonded relationship with your mom because of that, that's what you're going to say. So that's why your relationships are fucked up to this day. And it's like, no, your relationships are fucked up because you don't take responsibility for your shit. You overeat and you're a fat fucking idiot. And like that. Is that fair to say what I'm saying? No, it's not. I think it's not. But then what the fuck? Like, how? What the fuck?
It is fair to. I mean, it's a little insensitive.
Yes.
But it is fair to say in this way. It's not that this person is an idiot because whatever you just said. It's that they didn't. Life didn't train them to be strong and have self-discipline. That's their problem. And so now they're a fat, lazy fuck, not because of the Kennedy thing, not because of their wimpy little trauma, because they weren't given this like strength that hardship gives a person.
Oh, dude. So what is that thing? Because that thing that they weren't given, we can't then say, oh, that's the trauma. You were traumatized because your parents didn't give you this.
No. It needs to be it's not trauma. It's like they weren't given a strength. So one term that's used in psychology is optimal frustration, which means you don't get what you want, but not too much so it traumatizes you, but enough so that it builds strength and resilience. So they weren't given optimal frustration, so they're a wimp, and so now they're whatever, and that does kind of spiral, and these people become serial killers, so they're fucked up. But they're fucked up. It's not trauma that's the source of it. It's the lack of optimal frustration. It's the lack of delayed gratification. It's the lack of self-discipline.
Whoa. Well, so then, can you please explain, Satbir, how he was given too much optimal frustration, and now look at him. Now he doesn't need therapy, and he's supposed to go to his damn therapy, right, Mr. Satbir?
Oh my lord.
Dude, what do you think of these theories, dude? Just
yeah, man. I don't fucking know. I mean, I think it's important, man, to like hang out with the right fucking crew. You know, surround yourself with motherfuckers like you guys, and you're just like, yo, fuck it, let's go, let's fucking hit the gym and work on fucking muscle ups at 45, and just continue to be a fucking, you know, a badass in that way. I mean, I don't know. I definitely want to identify with people that are doing cool shit. You know what I'm saying?
Do you think that might be therapeutic for you?
I think so. Yeah.
Like, dude, could we call that therapy, and then you can charge the Dharma for this? Like, all of us, we should just do our next episode 3x3 frames doing muscle ups in the park, and then just bill 3HO $10,000 per minute. Or no.
Well,
what do you think?
I'm kind of wanting to speak to what Satbir said is like, the word therapy could mean different things. And Satbir is kind of saying that like identifying strength and identifying supportive resources and surrounding yourself with supportive, strengthening resources is a healthy, quote, therapeutic thing. And that's for sure fucking true. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And typically what is called therapy, they don't want to recognize that as so much. They more want to focus on the victim hurt thing. It's like they're more focused on the parts of ourselves that got chipped off and lost in the closets. And we want to go and reclaim these hurt parts of ourselves. And that can be a valuable thing too, but I almost sort of feel like it's almost like a hierarchy pyramid thing. What Satbir is saying is more important on a foundational level. And if you have that intact, this strength and self-discipline, then maybe you can go up and do this kind of slightly more psychological luxury thing of trying to reclaim your people, but your other parts of yourself. But if you don't have the self-discipline thing intact and you try to do this thing, it just sucks you into this fucking victim thing.
Yeah. When you guys have a new patient or whatever, what is your process, or like what do you do in order to get somebody to a healthy fucking place? Like, what would a normal situation be like for, let's call it, a good outcome?
Well, if we're talking about it in these terms, I think most therapists fail to do this, but if they don't have this self-responsibility thing intact, then they're not really good candidates for therapy, because like they ultimately they're kind of whining that the world is too hard for them. And if I'm sitting with a patient, I can't make the world easier for them. There's nothing I can do.
Right.
It's like, I'm having trouble finding a partner, or I'm having trouble finding a job I want, or I'm angry at my dad or whatever. And them complaining about it and me empathizing with it can only be so helpful. But if they don't have this, it's sort of like the paradox of you didn't make the mess, but you still have to clean it up. And if therapy just focuses on, you didn't make the mess, poor you, it doesn't get you anywhere. You also have to focus on, but you got to clean it up. Porn, Satbir asked a good question. Let's hear you respond to that.
Yeah, well, so I was just going to ask, like, well, what is the patient being treated for? But let's just assume it's for this, right? The person has experienced some form of trauma. Well, it depends on the extent of the trauma. If it's like, if the person says to me, well, I need to come in and work on my PTSD because I flew in a plane and I lit up the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and I need to tell you all about the people's faces as I shot them, I will say, oh, wow, that's an unbelievable thing. You do need therapy. I'm not going to treat you, right? Like, I personally will not treat super hardcore cases of trauma just because it does something to me that I become ineffective. I
That's interesting.
I become very wild, like in this meeting, right? I lose my objectivity. So in this area, I don't do a lot of trauma work, actually. And a trauma-informed therapist would listen to this and be like, of course you don't. Look at how fucking stupid you are, right? Listen. So I would have to answer it about just anything else. If the person came in and had like a real live anxiety disorder, then I spend a lot of time trying to understand what is like, where is their life really impacted by this? And mostly what I do is I don't spend a lot of time judging what happened in the past. I'm actually more focused on what are you doing behaviorally, habitually to function in the world today. So it's almost like I'm working on this foundation that Satbir was talking about. That's a lot of what I do.
Totally. Yep. And that's crucially important. And I do think we could criticize the field of therapy for not focusing on that enough and focusing too much on collecting our traumatized parts. Because if a person hasn't built this foundation, I kind of don't think they should be doing that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair.
I got to run, you guys. Keep going if you want. But obviously, we're right in the middle of shit. We should just continue this conversation.
You bet, man. It's awesome.
All right.
Good to have you again.
Pleasure talking to both you guys. Catch you later.
Yeah, later, man. Yo. Hey. Wait, so what did you... Is that what you thought? What did you think was going to happen if we talked about this?
Well, I think it's good, to get Dave, more involved. I think his perspective is extremely valuable. I mean, we definitely need more dudes like that in the conversation on India.
Yeah.
After even listening to the podcast we did last week, I was like, I feel like we're getting somewhere. You know what I mean? Even just, you telling your story is fucking mad important. I mean, it's something that needs to be done. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, it's true. What you point out about the strangeness of trying to bring therapy into this otherwise, it's a supercharged conversation about child abuse and repeated trauma, right? And I remember initially because I was training as a psychologist so early, like 20 years ago, I went and saw a few psychologists and basically freaked the shit out of them and had to leave. Like really, when I would tell them just a bit about my day-to-day life, which was like actively charged with all of this India shit. And I just remember this one guy, after I was explaining to him, oh yeah, this is what I'm doing, right? Like this past weekend, I was out, I got in a fight, it was like, and the guy, he like recoils in his chair and he goes, oh, but you wouldn't hurt me. You wouldn't hurt me, would you? That's actually what he fucking said. And like, it was the worst thing he could have said. I'm like, because of that, I became like terribly ashamed of how I was behaving, or like I already knew I was acting like an animal, but I expected this person to like meet me there and say like, okay, and what about this is hard, or is any of this good, right? Like he could not do that at all. That's the most basic thing you could do. Just like validate and then say like, yeah, and so what else about this? He could not do it. I was too scary. And it's like, I'm not a very like big, formidable, scary dude. I was just telling him a fucking story.
Yeah. I wonder if it becomes scarier because your perception of it is different from you being there and you can see all the sides. Like, I wonder if that guy would react the same way if he was, the dude sitting next to you or the fly on the wall or whatever. Is it just like thinking about being in it that becomes extremely scary? Or if you're just like what I was saying last week about just being in it and you're just in it and you're just reacting to what's happening in front of you. But the idea of it is way more intense and scary. It's like, that's like the idea of fear. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, what are you saying about like you think that the way that we have learned to talk about India and this joint experience, do you think that was somehow odd enough to be alarming to that dude? Is that what you're saying? Because maybe I didn't hear you right.
Well, I was talking to my godfather, and he's a very kind person. He's like a hippie guy, but he's also this builder, and he's a super peaceful person. And I was explaining to him like, the first time like you slap a person across their face, like, yeah, like that was like you might have like felt bad about it for a while. And then after you've done it, 50, 100 times, whatever you've done, you kind of just get numb to that. You get very used to it by being in the environment of like kind of how we grew up. And then it's, it's kind of like what we're doing. It becomes like, haha, like it's a joking thing. And it's like, But if you're not exposed to that, it's just such an extreme like difference from where this other person came from. And I don't know if they get intimidated by that, or it's just like, whoa, like if that happened to me, I would be so fucked up. But it's not like it's just like you're thrown into it. I mean, it's something that like gradually happens, over time.
That's such a good point, right? Right. So you perhaps you and I or others have been slightly skewed, and we talk about graphic violence in a way that may sound psychopathic to some people, right? Where there's some actual injuries that occur, and we're sitting there, ha ha ha, oh my God, can you believe that? Where it's like, but I have to just imagine very quickly to other countries where or even within this country, if you are imprisoned for a long time and you see all kinds of escalated violence and there's a lot of similar type of talk, right? And there's similar kinds of scenarios where it happens, but I guess it's not too common where you talk about childhood like that. I think that's a really weird distinction, right? Because there's no childhood prisons, and then there's no there just fucking aren't, right? Like, and there's no childhood combat. You don't send kids into combat, where these other places in the world, right? So I think there's something odd about that, or unique to this story, right?
Yeah. I mean, I remember hearing a story about another girl that went to India, and she was a very like well-behaved child, and she's like an awesome kid, and she was having a very hard time talking about India 20, 30 years later. And I think what she was doing was she would come home on break and she would try and be on her best behavior, right? She would try and do this because she assumed that she was doing something wrong, and that's why she was being sent over there. So yeah, it is totally a unique situation where it's like, why were we over there? What was the real purpose? I think the only one that could really answer that is the yogi. I mean, like, what did he think the outcome was going to be of this? Like, yeah. Have you spent some time like kind of like wondering like if there was a thought out process
Satbir,
of why we were over there?
I spent a lot of time directly talking to Yogi Bhajan after India, just me and him alone, and saying, what the fuck are you gonna do now? And honestly, it was so weird to see I thought that he would have some wise thing to say. He just said, what he said is so odd, and it only makes sense now that everyone found out what he was like. What he said to me in one occasion was, I'm an old man, and there's nothing I can do about this. As I said, look at how many people are coming back from India, and they are in so much trouble. They're being institutionalized. And I was like, buddy, what is the plan? Let's come up with a plan where we'll integrate people back from India. And he just started crying. He like literally gave up and started crying and said, I'm an old man. I can't change my ways. That's what he said. Like he literally just was like, I had nothing doing. I cannot do anything. Like, what the fuck? So I don't think his plan was very well put together, like, honestly. And it's just kind of like, well, oh well. Like, it's now just a story between each of us and our families, right? Like, there's that kind of a nuclear family between you and your mom and dad, me and my mom and dad. And then we have that larger kind of collective, less organized thing where we're all still in contact. But I don't know. This conversation is coming out, and I just was a little alarmed that it's like, oh man, I hope everyone doesn't like suddenly become identified as like, oh, we're all victims, and so now we're fucked up. Because once people start to look at this really messed up literature that like the changes in your brain, physical stuff, like I don't think that's very good for your mindset, because it just keeps going on and on. Oh, then you're like 6 times more likely to have a substance abuse problem. You're like for sure going to get a divorce. Oh, for sure you're going to have some abuse issues with your own children. And it's like, shut the fuck up. No, I don't think so. Right? Like, I don't... Do you see my problem?
Yeah, no, totally. And you were kind of about to bring that up earlier about what were they saying when you were in school and you like were gonna have to like run out of the class, or you'd be like, what the fuck? Like you were saying, based on what modern psychology talks about, I should have this condition, this condition, this condition because I experienced all this stuff as a kid. And you're like, hey, like that's not the case. You know what I mean? So where do you see that fitting, dude?
Dude, I don't know, because for years I just hid this whole story, because it was almost like, oh, well, if this happened to you, like severe neglect, repeated physical abuse, right? For all that time, for sure you're fucked up. For sure, right? Like, and now, because people are doing psychology backwards. They're looking at the statistics and saying, oh, yeah, we looked at 100 people who were traumatized. Of those 100 people, this is how they behave. This is what their life looks like. It's pretty bad, right? And I don't know how they picked these people. And then they'll reverse use that statistic and put it onto you. Oh, you've really suffered trauma? Yeah, for sure. It's undeniable. Well, then this is going to happen to you, statistically. And it's like, what a fucking thing. And because they're looking at so many variables, then the statistics are going to be accurate somewhere, right? And I don't fucking like that. I don't like that. I feel it robs you of a chance of having a good life. I'm serious. Like, that's my number one beef with modern psychology. And its view of, if you have been through this trauma, and if you look at just the statistics, right? And like, I don't like that, because like, you're blowing away all the statistics right now, right? You don't have a substance abuse problem. You are still married with children that you're raising them in an awesome way. It's like, you have a career, because you're supposed to not have a fucking career. Oh, you should be fired from all these jobs. No, all this isn't happening. And it's like, oh, well, and so then what? Later, are you going to be like, oh, I got fired from this job. Oh, that's because in India, they gave me 2 slaps. I got fired from this job because that one time. No, you probably got fired from the job because you fucked it up, or that person wanted a better price. Who fucking knows?
Oh shit, man.
Dude, you see this? Totally. This is like a straight up mind warp trying to go into this territory. But hey, maybe that's enough for today, right? Awesome, cool, man. Well,
All right, brother.
have a great day. Talk to you
All
soon.
right, take it easy. Peace.
Later, man.